It's not unusual for visitors and residents to go to the Sanibel Library with questions about local history. Maybe they're researching a family name or a piece of property, or they want to follow up on an interesting story they've heard about past times on Sanibel and Captiva. Very often when they arrive with those questions, they're referred to this librarian, Betty Anholt. Her primary job here is to process all the new books that come in and assign them a number and a shelf location. But fellow staff members are quick to point out that her love of island history and her unique ability to uncover and collate written and visual information from the past are also invaluable assets.
I mean, it's a bonus to us that she's working here, because so many people do come in with questions and want to look at old photographs and so forth. She's definitely an asset, both from a historical perspective, but also for the library work that she does. She has well deserved the title of the island historian, not an island historian, but the island historian.
Well, if there's ever a question about island history, that's the immediate source. Everyone always says, well, you have to check with Betty. She's at the library. And we've been so lucky to have her as that resource in that location. It's just been the best. She is the queen of island history.
Ruth Elizabeth Frazier was born and raised in New Jersey and has the distinction of having one of her very early baby pictures autographed by movie star Humphrey Bogart. Bogart autographed the picture when the actor was appearing in a USO show where Betty's father was stationed while in the military. While growing up, Betty's family visited Florida often, and she developed a love of nature from these trips and other vacations around the country. After graduating from Rutgers University, Betty and her husband, Jim Anholt, moved to Sanibel. One of their first business ventures here was ownership of a gas station on Periwinkle. Betty kept the books for the station, but also worked at two nearby businesses, Elsie Malone's Shell Shop and Ralph Woodring's Bait Box. It was here she began to meet many island characters who would tell her stories of early island life.
It was so strange to see these rough and tumble fishermen come into the shop, and she is this sponge of information. She just absorbs everything that it kind of encounters. And so she learned about fishing, and she learned about shrimp, and lots of shrimp. But she also would sit and listen to their stories and talk to these people, and she made amazing friendships.
After the oil crisis of the 1970s, the Anholts decided to sell the gas station and go into the trolley business. At first, it was meant to be a form of public transportation to get people from one end of Sanibel Island to the other. But along the way, Jim and Betty had been providing live and recorded snippets of historical information researched by Betty, and it was soon apparent that visitors and residents wanted the historical tour more than they needed a form of transportation. The information relayed on those tours led to the publishing of the first of Betty's several books about island history, The Trolley Guide to Sanibel and Captiva Islands.
And I believe that was actually really the beginning portion of her doing history on the island, because she had done this audio tour. And then they started hiring her on to charter buses to recite the tours.
When I first moved to the island, she was just coming out with this little booklet. It was called The Trolley Guide to the Island, and there were maybe 2 or 3 paragraph stories about things, but for a person like myself who likes telling little stories or little anecdotes here and there to kind of salt and pepper and spice up a talk, that little book was such a gem, and mine is now crumbling and falling apart and dog-eared, but I just adore it.
Betty would go on to write 4 more nonfiction books about island history. Library staffers say the 1998 book, Sanibel's Story, Voices and Images from Calusa to Incorporation, is the most popular of Betty's books among patrons. In 2004, Betty co-authored a book about the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation with Gwenda Hyatt Clements. Then came a book about Sanibel's fire and rescue history in 2006. And her most recent nonfiction work is a book about the conservation history of Sanibel and Captiva, co-authored with longtime conservationist and family friend Charles LaBeouf.
We played off of each other's knowledge, and I think it turned into a great book about the islands. In my early days on Sanibel, the historian was Eleanor Dormer, and I worked with Ellie when she did her book, The Seashell Islands, and I explored the early homesteads on the refuge that had been obscured. And when Ellie passed away, there was really no one to take on that position as the premier historian of Sanibel. And Betty's interest just began to gel, and her interest in learning more, and that just generated more interest in her, and she became what I think is the best historian Sanibel's ever had.
LaBeouf says Betty's first and only foray into fiction, the recently released Turtle Coast, is a gripping depiction of our coastal legacy. The novel relates the struggles and sacrifices of the coastal residents who made their living in the fish houses and rustic island dwellings of Southwest Florida waters in the 1920s. Betty draws not only on her extensive research and conversations with members of the local fishing trade, but also from her own outdoor adventures with her late friend, Lucy Fryer.
Lucy and Mom were kind of like Thelma and Louise. The two of them could get into more trouble and get right out of it than anything else. They would go plan these little adventures where they would go canoeing. And you and I would think of going canoeing as being an afternoon, take a picnic lunch. No, those two would go for 2 to 3 weeks at a pop, and they would go, like one adventure was they spent 2.5, almost 3 weeks in the Everglades. The two of them in their own canoes with water and supplies and tents, and they would just go out into the Everglades. The two of them had an adventure where they canoed from the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia to Cedar Key along the Swanee River. Mom wrote journals the whole time she was doing this, and they would talk about going down the Swanee and seeing fire ants in balls the size of softballs, just rolling in the water so that they would get across the river, and praying that they wouldn't hit their canoes.
I've known Betty Anholt for about 30 years. It's either 88 or 89. I know that in 1989, she and Barbara Toomey did the field catalog for the Yucep Island dig that we were on there.
William Marquardt is the Curator Emeritus of South Florida Archaeology and Ethnography at the Florida Museum of Natural History. Beginning in the 1980s, he was the leader of numerous archaeological digs in Southwest Florida related to the history of the Calusa Indians, and Betty was a volunteer on many of those excavations.
Cataloging is a very important part of what archaeologists do, and that means keeping track of all the things that archaeologists find in the field. So everything that gets found, it's important to know where it was found, what level it was found in, what it was near. We call this context. And what Betty has done for us, both at Yucepa, then later at Pineland, and through the years, is to be a kind of a librarian of the site, to hold all those details, so that we can go back later, even 30 years later. Even if you went there today, you would see the same catalog that Betty created is still a guide today to finding not only what we found, but what we found out and what we found in the various digs that we did. One of the most impressive things about Betty is her observational abilities. For example, when she and Barbara Toomey and Karen Walker were sitting puzzling over an open excavation we had going at the Pineland site, and they were looking at this layer of surf clams and pen shells and other things that were that were clearly not what you would expect to find in the bay around Pine Island Sound. And so Betty and Barbara said, well, that's exactly the kind of thing we see on Sanibel Island after a storm on the beach. And that was what put Karen on the track of explaining that a major hurricane had come all the way across Pine Island Sound, and a wall of water had deposited this layer of high salinity shells, just like you'd have on the beach, except a major hurricane. And that happened about 300 AD. So that was a pretty major finding.
I think she's insatiable. I think that and she likes the primary sources, and for anyone who's digging into history, you can go to the secondary places, but that's when it's been pre-digested and out for people to look at, and it's kind of twice removed. Betty's at the fire. She's right there.
She's the one who has taken both islands' history to heart. We all can write stories about it or talk about it and discuss it, but she's the one that's taken it to heart.
She sees the big picture, and she understands that you need all the small details in order to be able to put the big picture together.
Betty, congratulations on receiving this award. On behalf of the staff of the Sanibel Public Library, I want to congratulate you. Nobody we can think of deserves this award more than you do.
Betty, thank you. For my entire career on Sanibel and Captiva Islands, you have been my source, and I so appreciate who you are and what you've done.
Congratulations, Betty. Nobody deserves it more than you. We couldn't do it without you.
Betty, Gene and I are both proud that we've known you all this time and enjoyed some great adventures with you and Jim. And if anyone is deserving as a par excellence award for historian, it's certainly you. Congratulations.
Betty, thanks for 30 years of friendship and for all you've done for archaeology and history and ecology in Southwest Florida. Congratulations.
Mom, I know you know how much we all love you and how very proud of you we are. And you deserve this. You're an inspiration. And you're my hero. I love you.